Welcome to another of our Clèir Eilean Ì Getting to Know Folk Around the Presbytery videos. And this is the first one that hasn't been on little squares on screen. I'm here in Oban, and yes, it's raining. It's often said, if you can't see Kerala, it's raining. If you can see Kerala, it's about to rain. Well, it's just a wee bit of a drizzle here. And our guest today has, we've kind of met halfway, and I'll introduce to you Kenny Wilson. Kenny, delighted to have you with us today. Where have you travelled up from?
I've travelled up from the beautiful island of Gia, just off the southwest coast of Kintyre.
And how long have you been living and working there from Gia?
We moved to Gia in 2016, so this will be our 8th year on Gia.
Right, but you've been working for the Kirk for more than that, 8 years.
Only one more year than that. I started in 2015.
Right, and tell us a wee bit about your role, what it is that you're doing.
Well, my role is really to be a kind of facilitator for churches and agencies that want to do youth work from a Christian perspective. So I've spent quite a bit of time responding to people who say, we'd like to start something and see if it would work. But I've also spent quite a bit of time, particularly in the early years, working in schools who were open to the idea of having a Christian coming in and doing some work around the religious moral education.
Right, and has that been well received?
Where it happened, it was very well received. Very well indeed, because we tried to introduce them to Christians whose life was about faith, and trying to draw the distinction between religion, which is usually what is taught in schools, it's very dry and dusty, and faith, which is very much alive and living. So to introduce them to people who changed the world, whose faith enabled them to change the world.
Right.
And that was really good, and we used a lot of music with that as well. So we were invited back. But since COVID hit, unfortunately, access to schools and all that has diminished to almost nothing, really.
Right.
So doing these kind of courses has really dropped away.
So we need to start building up again that youth work, schools engagement all around the presbytery.
Absolutely, if we get the opportunity. And of course the thing that limits everything is access. If the head teacher doesn't want you there, you're not allowed in. If the head teacher is open, then you are. So that's the key thing. And our main focus at the minute is in Campbelltown, at the grammar school in Campbelltown.
Right.
Because in the last 2 or 3 years, despite having done quite a bit of interdenominational youth work down there and developed a volunteer team, good sized volunteer team, we've now been invited in to the school.
Right, yeah.
And have had 2 or 3 terrific years in the grammar school. And certainly from the conversation I had on the last day of last term, this being the second day of this term, the staff certainly seem to appreciate it, and the kids, by the number of times they shout, Kenny, hello, come over here. And
fantastic, yeah.
That seems to be working quite well.
Last week I was speaking online with Megan Hall, who's
down
at
absolutely.
Campbelltown. So
delightful.
You'll know her, yes, yeah. It was great to hear.
She's a great addition to the South Kintyre team.
Right, yeah, fantastic. Clèir Eilean Ì is obviously very, very new, very recent, having formed the 1st of January this year.
Yes.
What would be one of your first impressions of the new presbytery, new ways?
I think the thing that struck me most is when the presbytery gatherings get together, we always start with good news. And that's very uplifting at the start of an event that will definitely be a lot of administration and things like that conversation going on, and all about the adjustments that we have to make, moving from one very large rural presbytery to another very large rural presbytery, huge one, and creating, it covers almost half of Scotland, doesn't it really? And wondering, how are we going to manage that? But to manage it starting with good news is great. And I have to say, the first time I heard Rory speak, our new Presbytery clerk, I loved the fact that he focused on just one thing, and that was talking about Jesus. Because to have Jesus at the heart of it all is where we all began, it's where we want to be, and certainly from a youth work perspective, it's certainly where we want to be.
Absolutely, yes, and we need to tell the stories, the good news stories.
Indeed.
So let's hear another good news story from your neck of the woods. What would be? You're at a presbytery meeting. We're doing that. Let's share some good news. What's Kenny going to tell us?
Well, I suppose one of the things that's been really tremendous is that we've said to the staff in the school, "What can you think of anything that we could do for you?" And that's something we do every year. We do a review and then we ask them. And they've said to do certain things if possible. And one of the things was to create a quiet room in the school where at lunchtime kids could come and escape from the noise and bustle and hustle of lunchtime and just have a place where they can be quiet. And that's gone from 1 or 2 kids to now being filled. It's what they used to use as the library, now being filled with young people that we can sit down and talk with as we play Uno with them, or as we play chess or something like a quiet game with them. And young people now coming up to us and asking, is club on today? Is that on lunchtime? So that's been a very, very positive way forward for us. And that's good because it's brought in the staff, it's brought in the young people, and it's brought in the team.
Yeah, one of the things that I've really appreciated about these conversations with yourself and with others around the presbytery, just these good ideas. And I'm thinking, here, there's something that I could be exploring in the high school in my area. So thank you for sharing that. Before we hit record, you were mentioning something about a youth pilgrimage.
Yes.
Tell us some more about that, Kenny.
Well, that came from a chat with the 3 people that were doing youth work in 2017. Myself and Paul Buteman, who have both been around for a while, and one of our colleagues here in Oban. And we were asked to try and think about 2018 being the year of young people. What would we do? And neither Becky nor Paul or I could come up with anything that we thought would be fantastic, except we had this one idea that we described as, "Oh, it's pretty dull, that one, really. I'm not sure that will ever happen." But all of a sudden it took legs. And the idea was to do a youth pilgrimage, just to spend a week with a group of young people walking and chatting and sharing our lives and staying in churches along the way and thinking a little bit about Columba and the way that these Columban Christians lived their lives and caused such a ripple of effect that Christian faith spread right throughout what is now Clèir Eilean Ì.
Well, yes, yeah.
And to our complete surprise and utter delight, just being with a dozen young people and walking and sharing our lives and praying together was just a huge success. And we asked the young people, would you do this again next year? Yes, they would. And some of them came back as leaders, and it went very, very well. And the lovely thing about it was, in every area that we went through, we talked with the churches beforehand, and they got very excited about it. And they said, well, we could do food for you as you pass through. You could sleep in our church as you pass through. So that gave us ways to connect with the local community. And it also meant that in some of the areas, the local community would actually organise an evening when we were passing through and invite their friends and come and meet these young people that are on this youth pilgrimage. And so it was just a lovely joining up of the church that existed already and the young people who were going to be the church of they are the church of the now, of course, but they were going to carry on the traditions of the church. And it was a tremendous success. It was killed off, unfortunately, by COVID, because COVID meant that we couldn't meet together, that we couldn't do all the things that we were able to do that made it so successful. But part of its success was its simplicity. It was literally just walking, talking, sharing our lives together. And when 12 strangers, and most of them were strangers to one another, started at the beginning of the week, just simply sharing their lives, by the end of the week they were a cohort, they were a group And most of them, I would say, loved it, absolutely loved it. So we ran for 3-4 years until COVID hit, and then that died, unfortunately.
And now that COVID restrictions are no longer part of our life, COVID of course still lingers on,
Sure.
but is it something that might happen
key
again?
to it is having churches that are not so afraid of COVID, that they would share their premises with us. So, I mean, it's not limited in any way to the geography of what we were doing. That was just because this was where we lived. But we didn't ever get as far as Iona. In fact, our big dream was to run a pilgrimage that went all the way from Columbus Footprints in the tip of the Mull of Kintyre all the way around to Iona. And that was going to be the next step in that sense. It was going to be a much longer pilgrimage, but we didn't get there because I'm afraid we'd been fearful. We've lost so many people to COVID that the idea of having young people sleeping in our churches and gathering together and things dropped off the radar. But if there were people who were brave enough to think, I'd love to do something like that, then we would love to do it too.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Tell us a wee bit about what Kenny enjoys doing when you're not working.
When I'm not working, well, because we have not too recently, about 2019, bought an old farmhouse and been doing it up, still doing it up.
Right.
And we're currently working in the garden. And both of my daughters, who are post-university, twins, are now back on the island, and they are trying to do some work with the herbs and the things that grow on our farm, and work with that and create. I mean, Amy, one of my daughters, creates the most wonderful headgear and things like that you would see perhaps at a wedding, a bride wearing one like that, and all the foliage in that comes from our land, and so that's one of the good things that's happening at the minute. So my previous gardening experience, mowing the lawn, has now expanded into trying to understand all about the plants and things that we grow that grow naturally.
Yeah, and wonderful to tie in all these thoughts with celebrating creation, caring for the beauty of God's wonderful creation. Yeah.
And my wife,
even on a rainy day like
today. My wife's very keen on the idea of trying to start something new in terms of church in the outdoors. Because she's a minister in her own right, as well as was the head teacher of the island school until a few years ago. So she's looking for opportunities to be able to go and reach people that don't come to church, and that have said to us that they won't come to church because it's just not for them.
Yeah.
So, meeting outdoors, sitting and chatting with them on the beach and doing things like that, they're far, far more open to that than they are to coming indoor to a service.
Yeah.
Because in a service, nobody ever asks them, what do you think? And that's what people seem to need. They need a sense of not just belonging, they need a sense of being important to what's going on.
Yeah. Just last Sunday in church, I got folk to do a wee bit of work, and some folk were terrified, but others really enjoyed. Actually, they were doing something. They weren't just sitting in the pew listening.
That's right.
We were talking about the journey through life from childhood to old age, and I was saying, what are the things you would go back and tell your younger self? And we took a moment or two and got folk to write these things down.
Great.
And then exploring the idea that if we'd say that to our younger self, are these things that we want to say to the young folk in our community now?
Yes.
And maybe in trying to bridge that gap between the terror and fear of the people themselves actually doing that, my plan is to put some of those things on social media in places where the youngsters will see, here's what some of the old folk would actually want to say to you. Slow down, be all you can be, live your dreams. There were some fantastic post-it notes that we gathered.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that people fear that kind of interaction. Don't ask me anything. But then when we do, they're absolutely delighted to be able to contribute, and it turns them from an audience into a congregation.
Yes.
And that's something that, frankly, we've not been very good at. We've kept people as audiences rather than congregations.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that's very important for young people, to ask them, what do you think? What do you think?
Yes, yeah.
Because they're told what to do all of the time, and very seldom do we ask them, what do you think?
Very much resonates with what Megan was talking about in the previous video. If you haven't watched it yet, then you'll find all the videos. I think we're at number 10 now.
Oh, that's good.
Fascinating to hear the stories from different folk around the presbytery. Thanks for your time just now, and we'll maybe get out the rain and go for a coffee somewhere.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Kenny.
You're more than welcome.
Thank
More
you.
than welcome.